Karen Travers, ABC News, joins us. Last night was the State of the Union address. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people were watching it waiting for a NASCAR-like car crash and for Biden not to be able to deliver it. Mm-hmm. So, Karen, what are you hearing? What is the overall sense of how Biden did?
Well, I leave that up to you to tell me what people out there are thinking about it, but I'll tell you the White House is really pleased with how that went tonight. A White House official last night texted us afterwards when we checked in to see, how did it go? And it was simple reaction. They just said, home run. They felt that this was a successful night for the president to draw a contrast with House Republicans in the chamber and also with, as he kept putting it last night, my predecessor. He didn't mention Donald Trump by name, and we have been told by officials heading into the speech last night that we should not expect him to do that, but that he would draw a clear contrast between their policies and their values. And he did that repeatedly throughout this speech that was much more like a campaign speech in the House chamber than a traditional State of the Union policy address. We counted at least 16 times where he referenced Donald Trump by calling him my predecessor, talked about their differences on issues like immigration, healthcare, abortion, guns, Russia, Ukraine, January 6th, and the economy. And those were some of the more feisty moments from President Biden.
I watched it in its entirety, Karen, and what I really liked how all the bullet points, and I liked the ordering of things, because he started with Ukraine, but then didn't address Gaza until the very end. I liked the order. What I found disturbing, and this would be with any president, just the outbursts, the screaming, the heckling, and we were talking amongst ourselves here in the studio this morning. When did that start with Obama? And I'm thinking if the president's giving a speech, there needs to be some sort of decorum where you don't heckle.
Regardless of party.
Regardless of party.
I know. I mean, there was that one moment back during the Obama years, and it was one congressman, and I remember covering that. And
a guy named Joe Wilson. Joe Wilson yelled, "You lie."
Yeah, you lie.
And that seemed to change things.
Yeah, and it was one person, and it was such a big deal, and we covered it for, a week afterwards, and it seemed, so out of the ordinary. And then, in recent years, it's just kind of become the thing where it's like call and response in the room. And, we have been told by White House officials going into last night that the president was preparing for that he was ready for anything, but also ready for what he anticipated would be heckling from some lawmakers, and that he was prepared to engage. I have to say, the White House loved the moment last year when the president went back and forth with Republicans on Medicare and Social Security, and they seem to be itching for a repeat of that because they thought that was one of his better moments last year. I think that was the same thing last night. Some of his better moments were when he was going back and forth with lawmakers, especially, kind of look at some of the different issues, the bipartisan border deal, where that was something that had been negotiated in the Senate and did not end up moving forward because House Republicans backed away from it. There was booing when he mentioned it, and the president said, "Oh, you don't like that bill." Conservatives got together and said it was a good bill, and he said, "I'll be darned, that's amazing." And you could tell he enjoys that sparring. And look, we probably talked about it this week. There was a lot of focus on what the president would say, the policy, the substance of it, but it's an election year. There's nothing that Congress is going to take from that speech and say, let's turn that into legislation now, because that's the reality in the election year. So many Americans last night were going to be tuning in to see how he delivered that speech. Did he have the stamina for an hour and a half in the House chamber? Did he have the energy to deliver that speech? Was he able to, kind of go back and forth with House Republicans heckling him like that? And it was a moment like that on the immigration bill and other things that the White House will point to say, look, this guy's got it.
Mm-hmm.
The other sideshows, if you will, George Santos showed up.
He did.
You talk about someone not being welcomed at a party. The guy clearly has some issues between his ears and he's delusional. But how do you know? I don't. How he has floor rights at this point?
Yeah, he does still have floor rights. I'm going back to just find my note from my colleague, Rachel Scott, who was the first one who told us that he was there. So former members do have privileges to be on the House floor. And Santos kept those privileges despite being expelled, which I know seems counterintuitive, and you wouldn't think that he could do it. But he did, and he was texting reporters saying that he was going to be there. And he showed up and was sitting on the floor last night in the lead up to it and engaging with his former colleagues.
Just bizarre. And, the Face of the Night award has to go to Mike Johnson and his weird little 12-year-old sort of expressions. But I got to tell you, it was Nancy Pelosi tearing up the speech behind President Trump. That's the same sort of lack of respect. And if you're going to raise standards, you got to raise it for both parties. Regardless of who the president is, treat the moment like it matters.
Yeah, I mean, it's really striking to see just kind of how raucous that room has become over the last couple of years. And I don't know if you ever go back to a different time where everybody's sitting on their hands. Obviously, you have the party who's part of the president is their party. They're going to be standing up and cheering at almost everything. But the other side, too, just that kind of freedom it seems like they feel to boo and groan and all of that. It's really something different from the last couple of years.
It completely is. We're on a world stage. And I was thinking, when I saw Mike Johnson kind of smirking and rolling his eyes, again, I went back to, I've seen other presidents of different, with differing parties sitting in those two chairs behind, when there was checks and balances, and they were stand up when you said, hey, unemployment is at, the lowest it's at, whatever the comment would be, they stand up and clap. I don't think he stood up one time. There's just no sense of unity in the country.
Yeah. Yeah, we had colleagues who were tracking all of that to say, when was there actual bipartisan agreement on things? And I think the one thing that did get everybody standing up was the families of the Americans held hostage by Hamas, that there was still support. There was bipartisan acknowledgement of that. But otherwise, you're right. I mean, whether it was, more funding for public school teachers or just general talking about the economy being strong, you didn't see that reaction from both sides of the room. But, it's the political times that we live in.
Yeah,
right?
No kidding.
So the president goes out and campaigns now on this speech. Do we have any sense of how many people watched it? Because
not yet. I think that will come later today. Usually it's like this afternoon that we'll get a sense of total eyeballs and ears, from streaming on television, on radio, and all of that. But they're look, it's an election year, so maybe people are tuned in more because they're curious to see what this is like. But I think for the White House, they felt that the audience they had last night saw a President Biden who's ready to go.
I know we're almost out of time, but I got to ask you one last thing. The Republican response is getting a lot of play this morning, and particularly the delivery style of the freshman congresswoman that did it. Any thoughts on that?
I'm not going to weigh in on that myself. I mean, the White House response to it after the speech was on the policy, saying, that Katie Britt, as a senator, that she basically saying she supports Donald Trump's policies on issues like immigration and economic issues, and pushing back on some of the take that she had in that speech.
Appreciate the time, Karen. I know you got to run. Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Thanks,
Karen Travers, ABC News.